My friend recently inquired why I divorced my wife, and I explained that one of the significant reasons was her noisiness in bed. He wondered if it was such a big issue that it led to our divorce. And I replied, yes, her noise was so loud that I could hear her from 2 houses away. A brilliant scientist was traveling across the country with his faithful chauffeur who had been driving him for over a decade. The driver, well acquainted with the scientist's speeches, decided to make a bet. "Boss," he said, "I've listened to your lectures countless times, and I'm pretty sure I've got them memorized. I bet I can give your speech in this town, and no one will notice. If I succeed, you pay me double for the trip. If not, it's on the house." The scientist, feeling a bit bored and intrigued by the challenge, agreed, thinking the odds were in his favor. They arrived at the venue, and the driver confidently took the stage, while the scientist sat in the audience. To everyone's amazement, the driver delivered the speech nearly flawlessly. The audience didn't suspect a thing. As the presentation ended, the microphone was passed around for questions. The driver continued to impress, answering inquiries with ease. However, things took a turn when a young professor posed an unexpected question, one the driver had never heard before. Panic set in as he had no clue how to answer. The driver froze, scratched his head, took a deep breath, and finally said, "My dear colleague, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but this question is so astonishingly elementary that I'll let my chauffeur in the audience answer it for me." Larry had been battling serious bad breath for most of his adult life, and he couldn't take it any longer, so he decided to visit a doctor in the hopes of finding a cure. After a thorough examination and various tests, the doctor called Larry back on Tuesday for the results. Anxious and hopeful, Larry sat in the doctor's office, waiting for the verdict. The doctor didn't mince words. "Larry," he said, "your breath could knock a buzzard off a shit wagon at 50 paces. However, none of the tests or my examination can pinpoint the cause." Desperate, Larry asked, "Is there anything I can do to fix it?" The doctor hesitated for a moment before offering an unconventional solution. "Well, sir, there is one unorthodox method you can try." Larry's curiosity piqued. He asked, "Tell me, doctor, what is it?" "You can do this," the doctor said with a smirk. 3 times a day, stick your toothbrush up your backside and then brush your teeth with it." Larry was taken aback and exclaimed, "That sounds pretty nasty, but will it cure my bad breath?" The doctor leaned in and replied with a mischievous grin, "No, Larry, it won't cure it, but it should at least tone it down a bit. Laughter is often the best medicine for odd situations, even when the cure sounds stranger than the problem." Ford geneticist Rick Halloran stood at the center of the grand hall, the buzz of reporters and camera flashes creating a dazzling spectacle. It was the most significant scientific press conference of the decade, and he had the world's attention. Clearing his throat, Dr. Halloran began, "Ladies and gentlemen, the time has finally come for the first human cloning experiment to be performed. The technology for human cloning has existed since the 1980s, but due to the complex ethical issues involved, it's taken us this long to get here." Amidst the throng of reporters, one couldn't contain their curiosity and blurted out, "What were the ethical rulings? Who gets to be the first clone, and how will they be raised?" Dr. Halloran adjusted his glasses and replied, "These were some of the most challenging aspects we had to address. The ethics committee decided that the first clone should be raised by a parental figure rather than a team of scientists. It should be a clone of someone who cannot have children the conventional way. And finally, for technical reasons, it should be an XY chromosomal specimen." Another reporter jumped in. "So, just to clarify, you mean—" Dr. Halloran nodded. "Yes. The ethics committee's verdict is clear. Let he who is without kin grow the first clone." The room filled with a mix of chuckles and laughter as it dawned on everyone that the first human clone would indeed be raised by someone who didn't have children, the very definition of he who is without kin. The clever twist in the ethical ruling added an unexpected dose of humor to the groundbreaking scientific announcement. In the midst of a military exercise, the general's jeep found itself lagging behind the long column of trucks as they moved forward. After a sharp bend in the road, they stumbled upon one of their trucks, stranded with one wheel deeply lodged in a ditch. The general, never one to back down from a challenge, ordered his driver to halt and leaped out of the vehicle to assess the situation. Approaching the stranded truck, he asked the driver about the issue, but before the poor driver could answer, the general kept interrupting, showing more enthusiasm than patience. The situation was indeed quite dire. With a firm resolve, the general scrutinized the truck, the stubborn wheel, and the treacherous ditch. He then turned to his staff and bellowed, "Come on, we can't leave this truck here! There are 4 of us, and we can do this!" With that, the jeep driver attached a tow rope to the truck, and the general, along with a colonel and a major, lined up behind the truck, ready to put their muscles to the test. With great effort and determination, they pushed the truck, while the jeep driver pulled with all his might. Slowly but surely, the truck regained traction and eventually found its way back onto the road. The men were victorious, wearing proud smiles despite their ripped uniforms and drenched in sweat from their strenuous efforts. Amidst the triumphant cheers and backslaps, the general turned to the truck driver, who had been watching the entire ordeal with a mix of awe and gratitude. The general, with his characteristic charisma, called out to him, "You see, we did it. Your truck wasn't too heavy after all. Now, what's your load?" And with a sly grin, the truck driver replied, "General, sir, it's a load of feathers." The general and his team had just put in an incredible effort to rescue a truckload of feathers from a ditch, leaving them with a hilarious and unforgettable memory of that day's exercise. Once upon a time, a man decided it was time to move out of his old house after a divorce. On the first day, he sadly began packing his belongings, putting them into boxes, crates, and suitcases. The next day, he had movers come to collect his things. On the third day, he sat down for a final meal at their beautiful dining room table, creating a romantic atmosphere with candles and soft background music. He indulged in a pound of shrimp, a jar of caviar, and a bottle of spring water. After finishing his feast, he went through each room, depositing a few half-eaten shrimps dipped in caviar into the hollow center of the curtain rods. Then he cleaned up the kitchen and left. A few days later, his ex-wife returned with her new boyfriend, and all seemed wonderful at first. But slowly, an unbearable smell began to permeate the house. They tried everything to eliminate it, cleaning, mopping, vent checking, steam cleaning carpets, and even using air fresheners. They brought in exterminators, but nothing worked. The house's aroma drove people away, and even the local repairman refused to work there. The maid quit in frustration. Desperate, they decided to move, but even after significantly lowering the price, they couldn't find a buyer. Word spread about the stinky house, and realtors wouldn't return their calls. In a financial bind, they took a loan from the bank to buy a new place. The ex-husband called his ex-wife and learned about the house's terrible smell. He offered to buy the house for a fraction of its worth in exchange for reducing the divorce settlement. She agreed, thinking he couldn't possibly comprehend the true extent of the odor. They quickly signed the necessary paperwork. A week later, the woman and her boyfriend happily watched the moving company pack up everything for their new home. In an act of spite, they even took the curtain rods, leaving the ex-husband with the house and its lingering shrimp and caviar scent. Even 3 weddings were being celebrated at the same hotel one weekend, and after the ceremonies and wedding meals, the 3 grooms found themselves at the hotel bar, excitedly chatting about their upcoming wedding nights. The first groom had an idea and proposed, "Why don't we make a pact to share how our wedding nights go? At breakfast, the number of pieces of toast we order can signify the number of times we, consummated our marriages." The other 2 grooms thought this was a fantastic idea and agreed. They spent the evening partying until the wee hours, and then they each took their newlywed brides to their respective rooms for their much-anticipated wedding nights. The following morning, at breakfast, the grooms couldn't help but give each other knowing smiles as the waiter arrived to take their orders. The first groom, with a contented look, confidently said, "I'll have 3 pieces of toast, please." The other 2 grooms exchanged appreciative nods and smiles. The second groom, feeling a bit bolder, raised his voice slightly and declared, "I shall have 5, yes, 5 pieces of toast, please." He glanced around the room and saw the other grooms winking and raising their glasses of orange juice in his direction. Finally, it was the third groom's turn, and as the waiter asked how many pieces of toast he wanted, the groom responded with a mischievous grin. "I'll take 7 pieces of toast, please. And could you make 2 of them brown?" The other grooms erupted in laughter, realizing that the third groom was slyly implying a particularly adventurous wedding night with a request for 2 brown pieces of toast. It was a humorous and unforgettable way to start their married lives.